to our interim executive director, Carlin, for the executive director's report.
Hey there. Thanks, Nick. Welcome, everyone. I was just trying to find the agenda to drop it in the chat. Sarah, can you do that?
It should be in there if I drop.
Oh, okay. All right. There were so many messages coming through. I didn't see. It's a pleasure to have you all here today. I wanted to share a report. Sorry, there's a lot of linky poos everywhere. I'm going to drop the full report here for you guys to look at, but I was just going to, there's a lot more information here. I was just going to share a few highlights with you on the director's report. So first, I wanted to share that we have Olivia Carter, our former AmeriCorps Vista, has been helping us, has come on to support Food Policy Council staff on a part-time basis. Olivia has been helping wrap up the ambassador program and primarily focusing on that program, and will be with us through not quite the end of November, but about 3/4 of the way through the month. So we're super happy to have her with us again and have that additional support. We also had an Emerson Hunger Fellow, Raneem Karbouji, joined us in September, and Raneem's project is actually reviewing the Pittsburgh Food Equity Ambassadors Program and kind of evaluating the ways that the Food Policy Council can continue working with the ambassadors into the future now that that Healthiest Cities Grant Challenge has ended. And that program is over, but the work of the ambassadors has been so meaningful, as you're going to hear. You'll hear more about that later tonight. But yeah, we kind of wanted to take a step back and look at that work and decide how we want to move forward with it. Raneem is going to be doing her fellowship remotely. She was going to be coming to Pittsburgh, and then had an incident with a slide and a young nephew, and actually had an injury that's preventing her from coming to Pittsburgh. But her work, fortunately, can be done remotely. So if you get emails or phone calls from Raneem, you know who it is. And then I also wanted to share that Erin Spangler, who's with us tonight, Erin, maybe you can wave your hand, with the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank, is pursuing her Master's of Public Health degree in Health Policy and Management from Temple. And Erin is going to be doing her graduate research project with us here at the Food Policy Council, and looking in particular at how organizations like the Food Policy Council can better communicate our impact to stakeholders and dig into how collective impact impacts policy work. Erin, feel free to interject if I left out any important details. So we're really happy to have Erin with us as well. I also wanted to share that we had last Wednesday, the Food Justice Fund Committee had a press conference outside of City Council chambers, and that was followed by a public hearing on the subject of food equity and urban agriculture. There are a bunch of links that we can drop in the chat for the press conference and the hearing. We had a number of the Pittsburgh Food Equity Ambassadors show up and talk about their experience and advocate for the Food Justice Fund and investments in food systems infrastructure. And I think for a great number of them, it was the first time ever giving testimony at a public hearing. So it was it was a wonderful day. I don't know, folks that were there, feel free to drop a reflection of your experience in the chat. But I personally, I wrapped that day up feeling really inspired. It was like one of those very special days to be a part of this network. So I applaud you all and thank everyone that has been a part of the Food Justice Fund Subcommittee and the Ambassadors Program. It was really wonderful. It was a great day to be a part of. So thank you all. Reminder that the Food Justice Fund Committee still meets. This is wrong. This is bi-weekly on Fridays, and that's changed, y'all. It's weekly on Mondays. So we will update that when we send out the notes. I apologize about that. The Ambassadors Program is wrapped up, but I've already mentioned that. and Fair Fares for Full Recovery. That campaign also has made some really huge steps forward. But I am going to not go too deeply into that because we have a guest here to talk to you about that later in the agenda. And the other thing that I just want to highlight is that in September, we had the Pittsburgh Urban Farm Tour. It was the 6th tour and it went really well. I think there were 12 sites on the tour, and I think 9 of them had never been on the tour before. So a lot of new sites got some exposure, and all in all, it was a really, also a really lovely day and event. So there's a lot more in the report. Feel free to read it all. If you have any questions or want to follow up, you can feel free to be in touch. I think that's about it.
Great. Thank you, Carlin. Does anyone have some brief questions for Carlin? I know a few of those things, the Fair Fares campaign and the Food Justice Fund will be covering later in the agenda. But any other questions for Carlin at the moment? All right. Thanks so much. We are monitoring the chat. So if you do have questions, put them in there and we will get to them. So next, actually, we're going back to Carlin for some member recognitions.
Right. Okay. So we try to use a few minutes of these meetings at the top of the agenda to take a moment to celebrate people in our membership. Just want to make sure that we give attention to efforts all across the food system. And for this meeting, I'm super excited to introduce to you all Dante Gordon. Dante is a Pittsburgh Food Equity Ambassador, and I'm going to give Dante a moment to speak in just a couple of minutes if you want to, Dante. But I also have here today Evelyn Furick, who is a part of the Food Access Innovations team at the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank. And Dante played a really essential role, a leading role in coordinating with the food bank and getting a number of food distribution sites coordinated at Carnegie Libraries. And Dante wrote a blog post about his experience as a food equity ambassador and his role in getting the distribution sites up and running, which I think we can drop that link in the chat as well. But I was hoping that Evelyn could just share like a short reflection of what that engagement was like and how having Dante reach out to the food bank helped, and just, yeah, and then give Dante a minute to share his thoughts.
Thanks, Carlin. I'm Evelyn, or Evie, and like Carlin said, I work at the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank. I'm on a team that was started in January, and the goal was really to kind of fill these gaps that the food bank sees. And this year, Dante was a huge part of that. He reached out to us, my colleague Alex, who couldn't make it tonight, earlier this year, and said, you know, I'm kind of new to this world and I really want to dive right in and do something good for these communities. I'm sure Dante will share more about this, but he has lived all over the city of Pittsburgh and has some really good connections to a lot of neighborhoods in the city. And so we saw this as a really good opportunity to kind of have somebody who has lived experience in these areas, connections, deep roots to areas that we wanted to serve, kind of help us and lead us along. So we approached the libraries, you know, Dante and led this conversation about wanting to have somewhere that was maybe non-denominational, kind of really welcoming to everybody. We started in Beechview, where Dante is currently a resident. He had told us that he had really good experiences with his family there. And I just want to highlight that it's been personally a big honor to work with Dante, and I have seen him grow so much during these 5 distributions, where he at first was like, I am a volunteer, but that's not true. He really led this kind of campaign, and I would tell him, no, Dante, you're not a volunteer. Like, this was your idea. And his communications with people who come up to our free farmers market model has just been really endearing and touching, and shows that it's important to make these connections. And he's really led this. And yeah, it's been such an honor to work with him, and we are continuing that. We have one in Hazelwood coming up. We went back to Beechview, and then I think the one after that will be in Carrick, and I'll share that link. But without Dante, this would not have been possible. So it's been great to work with him.
Thank you so much, Evie. And yeah, Dante, I want to hand it over. Go right ahead.
Okay, yeah, Evie, I'm touched by that. Thank you, and thank you, Carlin. I'm very appreciative of the recognition. This started out as me just trying to do something nice for my community, and it has turned into something that I would never in a million years expected. Being able to work with some good folks, people from the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank, and people from the Carnegie Library, and just being able to service these different communities and help these families, just get free food. And it's very much, a dream come true. And yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Dante. This is kind of exactly the idea in large part behind the ambassador program, is just giving people an opportunity to learn more about their food system and to understand their ownership and their role in it. So I feel like this was just a really beautifully illustrative of the best hopes for that program. So wanted to share, and yeah, thank you all. You all deserve a huge round of applause. Thanks very much for coming. Nick, I'm going to pass it off to you.
All right. Well, does anybody have any questions for Dante or Evelyn about all that work?
I did drop the flyers for the upcoming distribution, so feel free to share them with your networks.
Awesome. I'm also going to drop the link for our distribution request, which is how Dante originally reached out to us. So if anyone wants to talk to him or talk to us about doing that somewhere that you would like to, we would be happy to partner with you.
Cool. And while we're here, does anybody else have any kudos or congrats they want to quickly shout out? I'll give a shout out to Jen England and 412 Food Rescue for their first food rescue conference and summit that happened last week, which is awesome. They've been doing some great work. Does anybody else have any quick shout outs they want to give?
I will just add that normally Jen and Adia would be co-chairs of the board of the Food Policy Council, would be chairing this meeting, but Adia is enjoying herself out of the country, and Jen is, no surprise, after a giant event, feeling a little under the weather today. So Nick had agreed to jump in their place. So thank you, Nick. I give you some kudos for pitch hitting with about 10 minutes notice.
Anything for the Food Policy Council. All right, Denny, do you have something?
Yeah, I think, and Carlin's made reference to the Food Justice Fund activities that took place down at the City County building. And I think special thanks should go out to Ann Sanders and Sam Applefield, who worked tirelessly to pull all of that off. So congrats to them.
All right, anybody else? All right, well, if you have some kudos that come.
Sarah had her hand up, I think. Maybe not.
All right, well, if you do have some kudos that you remember midway through, type them in the chat. We'll make sure they're written down, and yeah, appreciate it. All right, so we're off to Fair. So I think Sam, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I'm going to try to make this quick because this baby is waking up here. But yeah, have the pleasure of introducing Laura Chu Weems, who've worked with closely for the last year and a half and has been a joy to work with. All right, I'm going to hand this baby off and hand the mic over to Laura.
I think the baby's actually giving kudos. So,
oh yeah, I'll take that as applause. Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Chueens. I'm the Executive Director of Pittsburghers for Public Transit. I'm going to share my screen in a second here, but I just want to say there are a lot of friends in the room. It's good to see everybody. And also that point that you made about somebody's young nephew and going down the slide. I have a PSA, which is never take your child down the slide with you, like small child, because I broke my my 1-year-old's leg when I did that. And it turns out that that is a common phenomenon. So if that's what happened, that's why you should never do that. All right, so with that.
In
is
this
that what-
case, the baby was fine, but she is not.
Oh, she's fine?
The baby is fine,
Oh,
but
but the
the
adult is
knee
not. Okay.
broke her
Well,
foot
don't
and
do it
ankle. Yeah.
anyways. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and I'll talk a little bit about the Fair Fares campaign. Okay, so I'm going to talk just very briefly about Pittsburghers for Public Transit, but really this is about the Pittsburgh Food Policy Council. And where is my share screen? Slideshow. Play from the start. Okay. So Fair Fares for Full Recovery. So PPT, for those of you that don't know, we are a grassroots organization of transit riders and transit workers. There's an image of a lot of people holding their fists in the air in Harrisburg, and everybody's smiling. And we organize with disability justice and immigrant justice principles at the forefront, among other things. And, you know, we have over the last several years been organizing around the issue of high transit fare costs. So we have some of the highest transit fare costs in the country relative to the cost of living and people's incomes. And we know that during the pandemic, this issue got particularly attenuated as the cost of goods and services went up and people lost their incomes. And we know that Black residents, immigrants, people with disabilities, and low-income folks represent a disproportionately high percentage of transit ridership. And so one thing that became incredibly clear was the way that fares are correlated, how transit is so essential to these communities, and that fares are really the thing that is rendering transit, and by extension, like all the things that transit connects us to, inaccessible. Because for the first time in recent memory, at least, transit was free for a period of time at the outset of the pandemic, when they suspended fare collection because of concerns of the interaction between riders and drivers. And so there were a lot of people still taking transit, particularly in those demographics that I said. And then they suddenly re-implemented full fare collection again in June of 2020. And we saw then steep ridership losses in many communities, particularly places like the Mon Valley on the 51 corridor and the north, on the north side, in the West End, in the Hill District and Penn Hills. And nobody was joyriding transit, right? Like nobody was doing it for fun. At the early days of the pandemic, right? People were only taking essential trips. Lots of businesses were closed, so people weren't necessarily even taking it for employment, but people really took it because they had no other alternatives, and were able to do so because it was affordable to them. And I think one of the things that we have pointed out over the last several years is just how galling it is that we invest, as we should, in public transit as a social utility, as a public good, because we know that's what it is. But we are willing to have buses ride half empty past people at this, the stops that people would take transit at, and not pick them up to take them where they need to go, because of $2.75. Because we're saying, because people are unable to put that amount of money into their fare box, we'll let them sort of lose access to life. And you probably all know more than we do that accessing healthy and affordable food is intimately tied to the accessibility and affordability of public transit. And so it has been a really powerful and important partnership that we've forged with the Food Policy Council and with many, many other partners across our region, to highlight the ways that these issues are intersectional. And just as a note, another thing that became clear was like transit riders are very poor and have gotten poorer over the course of the pandemic. So approximately 35% of US transit users during the pandemic had annual household incomes of $15,000. And that was the largest share of transit riders by income over the course of the pandemic. So what are we doing about it, right? So there's this really great and interesting move all across the US to say, well, transit affordability is a public health, like addressing transit fare affordability is a public health imperative, right? That it is good for cities to make sure that transit is affordable, that it is good for, certainly for individuals, for businesses that can access workers in a time of an incredible labor shortage, to ensure that transit is affordable so that people can get to those workplaces to provide the goods and services that we rely on. We built really with the Food Policy Council at the helm, the Fair Fares for a Full Recovery campaign. And I'm going to go to the website, which so many props to Kiam and Dan from our group, and from Emily Cleeth from Just Harvest for really developing this space for us to showcase the work and really bring more people into it. So over the last several years, I think that the key demand has been to say, people who are on SNAP, who are households that have received EBT, should be allowed to take transit for free, right? There's been an abundance of federal funding to support all sorts of relief initiatives, right? Like COVID relief funds that have gone to rental assistance, to food assistance. And it's like, well, transportation assistance should be a natural other place in which some of these resources should go. But I think it was also important for us to say that this is not only time limited to the experience of the pandemic, right? It has always been a challenge for people, low-income people, and to pay and to afford transportation fare, like transit fares. One of the things that we know is that in several communities of the Mon Valley, transportation costs exceed housing costs as the highest cost burden for households. In communities where transit usage is some of the highest of the entire state. So in the Mon Valley, some like 8 of 10 of the municipalities have the highest percentages of transit usage by the workforce of any municipality in the state, including like SEPTA and Philadelphia, the Philadelphia region, which is astonishing when you look at how little transit there is, right? Like people are reliant on these like minimal services, have lower incomes, but where transit fare costs represent this high cost burden and are an imperative source of transportation for them to get around. So we've been fighting for this thing over many years. Many things have happened. This website is great because it helps me, there's like a cheat sheet to talk about all the things that we've done. But lots and lots of organizations have signed on to this call and this demand. A letter that we wrote many years ago now, I think maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. More than 50 organizations issued a letter to the Pittsburgh Regional Transit CEO. In August of 2021, we've issued reports about how this would benefit both the transit agency and the broader region, as well as low-income households, collected thousands of petition signatures, released surveys, personal testimony about how this would change people's lives. You can see some of that testimony on the website. And we're now at an exciting juncture where we have won. We've won the first step towards what we are looking for, which is a long-term, fully funded, free fare program for SNAP households in Allegheny County. So the Allegheny County Department of Human Services announced about 3 weeks ago a year-long low-income fare pilot. That's very exciting. That is specifically what we asked for, that this pilot be a way to assess, to demonstrate the overwhelming benefits that we know that this will have on all of these the social determinants of health. So not just access to employment, but also to quality food and preventative health care and quality childcare and all the things that we know that people need. We want this program to assess all those impacts to also then justify funding from sources, so from like social service funding that goes to address those problems, to show that this is like a great intervention point where if you can allow people to have the freedom to move, that you have all these wide-ranging benefits. It's like incredibly cost-effective way to address a lot of these needs. And so we won. The pilot's details have not been fully disclosed, but what we can say is that it's going to affect a lot of people. This pilot's going to benefit a lot of people in the short term, in the coming year. It's a 1-year pilot. And we are really working closely with the Food Policy Council, with the Equitable and Just Coalition of Greater Pittsburgh, which is also spearheaded by Urban Kind Institute, Just Harvest, and others, to help think through the program design to ensure that it's successful. Because, right, we don't want to have fought all this time to win a pilot program and then to have it sort of fall down at the finish line and they say, well, we did it, but it wasn't very effective. It doesn't seem like we should pursue it. So we want to make sure that the program design is effective and that we recruit enough, like a lot of people to participate and stay, reporting on how this is benefiting them over the course of the year, and keep up the drumbeat to insist that not only, to keep up the drumbeat that this is needed, but I think also we're going to be in the coming months really pushing the candidates for the county executive position to commit to a fully funded, fully expanded program to encompass all EBT households, a fully fare-free program. So that will be a big thrust for my organization, and in coalition with with you all, with Just Harvest, with EJGP. We'll continue to work on program design and recruitment, and we're going to be asking for your help. So the last couple of things I'll say, and I'm sorry if I've been talking too long, is that it would be helpful as soon as the program is announced for enrollment, for you to help us enroll people help us enroll people into DHS's program, right? So pulling lists of your constituents that have EBT to sign them up for the FAIR pilot. I think it seems like DHS is going to be willing to have organizations be partner organizations to sign them up for this FAIR pilot. So that would be very helpful. Encourage riders to get involved with us for a fully free, permanent, low-income FAIR program. They can sign up to join us in the advocacy, which is critically important because this is going to be costly, right? It's going to be a big initiative to have fully funded. And so we need to show that there's a strong demand for it over the coming year. And they can sign up at fairfaresnow.org to be involved in the organizing. And if you want to get involved in the county executive, sort of electoral fight on a C3 side, to say that this is a critical issue that they should be paying attention to and making commitments around, we would love for that to be part of your work as well. So that's the long game, this is the slide, I guess, for it. But thank you so much. I'd love to hear any questions that folks have, but I just really want to celebrate the leadership of the Food Policy Council in hosting this coalition and all the resources that you all have put towards this. It's really important and I think meaningful to so many different sectors and so many issue areas and so many people.
Great, thank you so much, Laura. I see that we have a question from Joy. Joy, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Hi, how are you? So I also dropped my question in the chat. Would you happen to know if there's a time approximation, or you mentioned having constituents sign up for the EBT transit? First of all, well done. And second of all, do we know an approximate timeline for that, for when people can sign up? And also, should we tell people about the Pittsburgh Regional Transit Board meeting, for example? I'm signed up to testify for that Friday because it might be a positive way to effectuate change to total number of support enrollment.
Yeah, Joy, thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining us to testify at the PRT board meeting on Friday.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So to your first question, we don't know when they're going to announce the pilot sign up process. I think in some ways, so we had heard that it was going to be sooner rather than later. So even potentially by the end of this month, early next month. I think at this point, given what we know about the program design, there's still some work that we want to see happen to make it more in line with what we've heard from transit riders in terms of how they, how the program should be designed so that it actually meets their needs and how it could be successfully evaluated, that we would prefer for them to wait. But we don't control their timeline. We can only control what they're hearing from us around the demands around the program design. What we've heard is that it's going to be coming out sooner rather than later. I think it sounds like they were gearing up to launch the program by the beginning of the year, which means that recruitment would happen sometime before that. To your second point about testifying at the Port Authority board meeting on Friday, one of the things we're testifying about is how incredibly inaccessible the board meetings are, including the fact that you have to sign up a week in advance, and they close testimony sign up. Not to mention the sign up process itself is extremely difficult to navigate. So unfortunately, if anyone wanted to testify this week, they would be unable to at this point.
I have a question. So I read a couple months ago about some transit systems that have gone fare free. And part of that was because they realized that only a small portion of their revenue was actually coming from fares. Do you know if that's sort of the case? And I'm sure there are larger government funding issues with Port Authority, but do you know what percent of their revenue is from fares?
Yeah, that's a great question. So prior to the pandemic, it was something like 24%, 23 or 24%, which is smaller than many larger or many other transit systems. So I think like New York City, for instance, would be hard for them to go entirely fare free because they get more than 50% of their operating revenue from fares. And now the pandemic, with the ridership being less than what it was, fare accounts for even less than. So there is a tipping point at which the cost to collect fares actually exceeds the amount of revenue that they're getting from the fares. So that is definitely an argument to go fare free. I think that what I'm excited about that's new here is having the Human Services Agency really funding and administering this pilot and evaluating it is linking it so directly to these human service needs is unusual, but I think is really, really necessary if we're going to assess the efficacy of transit outside of just ridership and like the mechanics of running a bus service, right? It's like actually we have to think about all the savings that come from taking cars off the road, from allowing people to get and retain jobs, from, like all these things are things that are outside of what the agency accounts for in terms of benefit or cost, but we know that those things exist broadly, and I think that the DHS is better able to assess those things and then find funding sources that appropriately value the transit system for doing that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Any other questions for Laura?
I don't have a question, but I just want to say I thought that I made it in a public chat, but it was just directly to Laura. But Laura, I wanted to thank you for all of your hard work on this. The Food Policy Council has been, it's been our pleasure to be a part of it, and your leadership has been phenomenal. And we very much appreciate you coming here today and letting folks know more about this work.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, Joy, do you have something else to ask Laura?
Yeah, I actually did. So I also wanted to thank you for the tireless dedication you've had to this. And you made a point about air pollution in the Mon Valley when you have funding for buses, and they've announced they're cutting down 2% next month. It takes pollution off the road. There's been recently in the past week very high levels of pollution in the Mon Valley, and a lot of these buses take cars off the road and reduce some of that. So they're helping with public health. And as far as the agencies, they know how to reach clients, whereas DHS may not. For example, Casa San Jose knows how to speak to the Latinos in Spanish. A group dealing with the homeless knows where they might be under the bridges. The DHS may not know because they don't have regular interactions with them. So I think it's a good idea.
Joy, I feel like you're just reading my mind. No, I mean, these are things that we're definitely are thinking about. I'd love to hear more thoughts from you. I think we've been holding writer workshops, which have been really, really helpful and informative for ensuring that we can offer valuable feedback to DHS. One of those points is that we need not only for DHS to work with community partners, but they actually should probably be resourcing community partners to be involved in the recruitment and retention effort over the low income fare program, because it's going to be huge. It's just a big lift, I think, for all of us. So we'll see how they respond. But I think thinking about what partners should be involved is a great, and I think the CASA and the homeless folks that work with homeless populations is really important.
All right, thanks so much. So now we're going to pivot over to some happenings in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago at the White House Conference on Hunger. So I'm going to hand it over to Food Policy Council staff member Sarah for a report on that.
Hi, everyone. I think I'll probably do an abbreviated version, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone is sort of up to speed on the conference that happened. And we were initially potentially going to be joined by Stephen, but he is at a statewide meeting today. So I'll put out, I saw Anne was in here somewhere. Feel free to jump in, or others from the food bank. But essentially, back in the spring, the White House announced they were going to hold a conference, the Conference on Hunger, Health, and Nutrition. And from that point on, held bi-weekly calls virtually to get input and share what their thoughts were about the conference. And it was held early in the fall. It was a virtual one-day event, virtual for most. There were some invited advocates and agencies and religious leaders and nonprofits involved, but it was also live streamed on YouTube, so you can still go back and watch all of the sessions. But essentially, they used the conference to frame a national strategy with 5 pillars, which are improving food access and affordability, integrating nutrition and health, empowering all consumers to make and have access to healthy choices, supporting physical activity for all, and enhancing nutrition and food security research. So, 4 out of those 5 pillars are directly related to a lot of the work that happens in food systems. And, it ranges from increased funding to support research in these areas to actually revisiting and redefining some of the food assistance programs that we're all familiar with. So we have a few links we can share out. The national strategy is a completed document that was shared out. And then in the build up to the conference, I'd want to share the Feeding America had provided funding to food banks across the US to get to host listening sessions. And the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank hosted 2 sessions, Just Harvest hosted 1. And then the input and feedback from those sessions was submitted through the formal channels to the White House, which then used that information from all across the country to continue to develop and define that conference. So there was some input from the Pittsburgh region. And coming out of this, now looking at the national strategy and hearing what we heard at the conference, so Stephen actually was co-hosted a debrief session after the conference and shared out some thoughts from that as well, which we can share in the chat. But essentially, I just wanted to get it on people's radar. I mean, there's actually another virtual meeting tomorrow if you're interested in plugging into this, and we will share the registration information in the chat. But it's meant to be an ongoing conversation hosted by the administration. And I think throughout the course of this year, we'll get a better idea of how anyone who wants to be involved can be involved, how that national strategy could potentially impact our region, what it says about where the administration is focusing their attention. But yeah, that's the main update. And thank you for sharing those links, Carlin.
I'm sure there were some other folks here that watched it. Does anybody else have any reflection from it? I mean, this is pretty momentous. There hadn't been one of these in 50 years, right? Pretty significant.
Correct. And actually, a lot of the programs we're familiar with came out of the last one. So there were really high hopes that this would be transformative in terms of focusing attention on what needs to get. I mean, I'm trying to think, some of what they've said is certainly like continuing some of the waivers that brought about substantial changes in participation in programs or access to healthier food. There's a big fight to have those continued. And some of it is reforming. If you, for example, receive Medicaid, then how can we link that better to nutrition services or the existing research, what we know actually benefits people, instead of just continuing with the cobwebby programs we have. But Denny, I saw you on mute if you want to add.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other thoughts or questions for Sarah? All right. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. Appreciate it. Okay. So if you do have, questions for anybody who spoke, you can put them in the chat. And folks are monitoring and can respond to you in the chat or afterwards. So we're coming back from DC, back to Pittsburgh to talk about the budget engagement process and the Food Justice Fund with Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. A little easier to do my intros without the baby this time. So yeah, really excited. Jody McLaughlin, who is pursuing a master's in public health, through which she has done a bunch of research into food justice funds across the country, which she was kind enough to share with us, and not only share her research, but share a lot of her time. She's been a really active and dedicated member of the Food Justice Fund Committee, and really enjoyed not just working with her, but really appreciate all your contributions to the work, Jody. So yeah, I'll turn it over to you if you want to share some updates on what we've been up to in the committee and the public hearing and everything recently.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Sam. Those are very kind words. So as Carlin mentioned at the top of the meeting, the Food Justice Fund Committee hosted a press conference last week, which was followed by a public hearing. The public hearing was led by Deb Gross, who also spoke at the press conference. And the other city council members that were in attendance were Erica Strasburger, Bobby Wilson, and Ricky Burgess attended for a little while. I had to leave a little early, but he stepped out before I did. To my recollection, we had more than 30 speakers, and I'm not sure if that includes, that gave testimony. I'm not sure if that includes the written testimony. As a non-Pittsburgher, I had to do written testimony, and I know a few other people submitted their testimony as well. So I'm not sure if I'll ever know the exact numbers. I will say from the testimony that I heard, as well as at the press conference, there were some very emotional and very passionate statements that were made that were clearly very moving and very much painted a very clear picture of the disconnect in our community, where there is something that definitely needs to be done. We had really great media coverage. I heard from a lot of people in my community about it. They were very excited and were hoping that Allegheny County would also somehow get involved with this. But unfortunately, it sounds like there's a little bit of reluctance from Marigny regarding the use of ARPA funds, which is where we have requested the $10 million come from. So the committee is meeting every week now for an hour on Mondays at 11. Sorry, I have to get my cat off my laptop. Here we go. So we're meeting every Monday at 11 o'clock. If you would like to join us, we would love to hear feedback, especially as we move forward. We are currently exploring creative ways that we can urge or put kind pressure on the administration to prioritize the Food Justice Fund and make it a part of the 2023 budget by sometime in November. So, any questions?
I had a question actually, because I think I'd read, so the resistance or the hesitation from the Gainey administration is not that they're not enthusiastic, it's that the ARPA funding was allocated by Peduto's administration, and there may not be any flexibility for them to reassign those funds. Is that right?
That is what I understand as well. Of course, my question is, where is the $1.8 million that Councilwoman Gross proposed coming from when she proposed it last year? Additionally, public source has been very clear that about 75% or more of the ARPA funds have not been spent, even though they have been, given out as line items.
Just one other piece of context to add is that the city of Pittsburgh's budget is on a calendar year, so they have like Mayor Gainey released his draft budget. I think it was just a couple of weeks ago at the end of September. He'll then present. There were a couple of like public meetings that that were hosted by the mayor over the last weekend. He'll then present like a final version of his budget to City Council, who will then have their own engagement sessions. But by like mid-December, that's when the 2023 budget will be finalized. So there's not a lot of time to work with. We're definitely on a time crunch to try and get the Food Justice Fund in the upcoming budget. But just wanted to share that that context as well.
I have a question. The ARPA funds, are those funds set aside for county projects and would be allocated by Mayor Gainey because it's the Food Justice Fund is only within the city of Pittsburgh? So like, are those dollars available for county projects? And we're just trying to get them prioritized for this funding.
Yeah, so the city and the county both received separate ARPA allocations. So the city received $335 million, which they have complete kind of jurisdiction over, and then the county also received a separate, I think it was $381 million. The city has like a budget that they've laid out of line itemed of where all of that money is going to be spent. The county has not. They've been much more kind of opaque about how they're going to be using their funds. But yeah, so we've been so far we've been just focusing on the city of Pittsburgh.
Okay, we've got a few questions. Let's first hear from Joy. Joy, do you have a question? All right, Joy, you may be muted, but if you do have a question, you can type it in the chat. We'll be able to get to you.
I am trying to give you my question. I didn't want to talk over you, and I'm reading closed captioning, which takes a minute to pop up. So
I apologize.
Which, without due respect, I have a disability with hearing. Please just give me a minute. So my question is, how do we change that Gainey's mind? Because he did say that he thinks that food justice is a problem in Pittsburgh as it is. And they've quietly scrapped other programs, like they said that they were going to do a basic income for single moms in the Black and Brown communities, but that program got scrapped. So what happened to the funds that they had allocated that are no longer being used? Why can't some of that money be used to the food justice one? Okay, I'm done now, Rick.
I was just going to say, Joy, thank you for your question. One of the things that I think we're trying to do is put the Food Justice Fund in the kind of the same language or the light that the administration has been using. And so one of the things that we are wrapping up right now is a case for support that we have discussed presenting to the mayor's administration as well as some of the council members. And one aspect of that is looking at it through the lens of public health, which aligns with Mayor Gainey's plan for peace, which has 5 components for how they're trying to combat gun violence in the community. And one of those is the public health approach. So the case for support has some information in there that is showing multiple years of research outlining the relationship between food insecurity and the lack of social determinants of health with gun violence and increased violence in communities.
Thank you. Have you ever heard of the Squirrel Hill group that is trying to reduce gun violence? or ceasefire PA. I wonder if there's a collaboration opportunity where we can talk about food justice and crime prevention.
Those are great recommendations. Thank you.
Thank
All right, thank you so much, Joy. Shelley, you have a question?
Yeah, hi. I am just wondering, I know you guys are asking the city for money, but have you thought about asking the city for like other things that the city might provide that wouldn't necessarily just be cash? And also when you're asking for the money, what besides like, I know it's going into a fund that's going to fund projects, but it doesn't seem like there's anything specific. So can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we have, you know, on some of the various materials that we have that I can put links to in the chat, you know, we have examples of types of
No,
projects.
I've read all the stuff, and I know there are examples of things and there are wishes and hopes, but what exactly are you hoping to accomplish with $10 million from the city's budget?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of the fund is that we don't have, you know, projects that we're cherry picking to give money to, but that we are setting aside money so that each individual community group or you know, project doesn't need to go to the city or do their own grant making or anything like that to access funds. So
So who would they be going to access those funds?
That's actually something that's going to be outlined. We've met
So
recently.
that's
in one of our
undetermined?
meetings. No. We've actually put together an outline of how we would like the grants to be reviewed and considered and administered.
But it's still going to be a process by which someone has to go through a process to get granted this fund, right?
But it's a much more simplified process compared.
Is it? You
to
don't
us-
even have it outlined yet, though.
It is fairly outlined. I mean, that's part of the simplicity of it. It's a simple application. It's reviewed by a committee, and then the person, the organization, or the business is informed if they've received the money through a grant or a loan, depending on what they applied for. And in many ways, this is actually a more barrier-free approach to funding because it's open to individuals, not necessarily organizations that are limited by a 501c3 status. So if there are individuals in a community that are wanting to put together a process or put together a program to help bring healthy foods to their community, they're able to do that without the barriers or constraints of being refined as a nonprofit.
So the strategies aren't defined, but the funding will be there, is what you're saying.
If I could interrupt, Jody, thank you so much for your answers. The Food Justice Fund is a working table where the folks that are involved in those conversations are working through the details. And we can, you know, everyone's very welcome to those conversations. If you have some specific concerns, Shelley, I think that they should probably go to that table versus this this space right here. And I know
I just,
that you
sure, I
have
just want to
a-
encourage people to look at the materials and consider this, because I'm not seeing anything that's really concrete to me.
Okay, thank you. There's lots of folks on this call that have been working really, really hard to put legs on
I
that,
know, I
on that table.
understand, and I don't want to disregard their work. But I'm just
Okay.
saying,
Can
I
I
think
just
there's
say,
more
let's have-
substance
Let's
that's
move
needed.
along.
Let's have one person, one mic. So let's
Yeah.
try to avoid interrupting people and let people finish their statement before asking follow-up questions.
Thank you, Nick. I was noticing that Denny has a question. I'd like
Yeah.
you to go ahead, Denny.
Yeah, I don't know, I have a question, but I don't want people to be under the impression, if you haven't been involved in the Food Justice Fund discussion, to think that there are no specifics attached to it, because there are. And so if the question is, where would this money be going? What would it be being used for? It's been very explicit, you know, coming out of a rather lengthy process, that the purpose of these funds would be for expanding urban farming, developing community markets or mobile markets, aggregating local fresh farm food, reducing food waste, delivering cooking demonstration and nutritional education. And finally, and the one that I think is at least for me, most exciting, building capacity and providing technical support for Pittsburgh's farmers, business owners, and other food-related organizations. So it is fairly specific in terms of what the uses of the funds would be. It's also fairly specific, given the fact that it's a food justice fund, where we'd like to, where the proposal would like to see these funds expended.
Sarah, or thank you, Denny. Sarah, do you have something you want to mention?
Yeah, I guess I mean, reiterating Denny's point, I understood, specific processes, specific goals, but to Sam's point, no specific recipients will be designated beforehand. And that's sort of, it wasn't designed intentionally that way. But I did have a follow-up question for you, Shelley. You referenced asking the city for something besides money. And I just, if you have thoughts about that, I'd be curious to hear, or recommendations for what else to be asking that we might not be thinking of.
Can I talk yet?
Sure, yeah. Sorry, do you want me to answer?
Sorry, Lisa, I didn't realize that you were hoping to talk.
No.
Do you mind if Shelley responds and then
Sure,
Lisa, you
sure.
can go? Okay.
Okay, so specific things that I think could be asked for would be like space at local farmers markets, at city-run farmers markets for farmers that are local producers, so they can have a spot and not have to pay for it and guarantee that they have a market for their goods. We could ask for more staff to work on these things. We just got 2 farmers, which is great. Could ask for money to be put in the budget for the farmers to offer services and equipment directly to the farms that are people that are farming on city-owned land.
Thank you, Shelley. I'll mention that there is another Food Justice Fund meeting on Monday at 11 if folks are interested in joining. I'll now hand it over to Lisa. Do you have a question, Lisa?
Well, I wanted to also, I sort of get what Shelley's saying or asking, and I'm in like a sort of unique a moment in my effort, but I support the total Food Justice Fund and the idea of having that money set aside for when people need it. We need it, of course we need it, but I'm in the active process of building a green grocer here in Manchester, and I was kind of, what could I ask for? For me specifically, we're getting, the plans are going to the city. I have a application fee for them to review the plans. Every time an application is changed, that's another fee. For PWSA, and in order to get the lines, that's $5,000. The city has equipment where they can dig up and excavate. It's those kind of things that would save me, because that's expenses that would be coming out of my funds. And, directly right now, if they wanted an act, that's something that they could support me with. And that's what if I could ask individually, like, yeah, but if I had voices to like, here, we're ready to go right now, and she's ready to serve, and then she can be open next year, which I am going to be open, but that saves me additional resources. It really doesn't cost the city that much out of pocket. Well, it does, but if they want to say they can support us other than non-funding ways or financial ways, that would be a big lift, a huge lift for me. That's a tangible thing that I would ask for.
That's the kind of thing that I was meaning. Sorry, I'm cycling home, tracing the sun, so apologize for cutting off abruptly last time. Thanks.
All right, and thank you, Lisa. Joy.
So I was one of the Food Justice ambassadors in the second cohort, and we recently completed our cohort. What came up a lot to address one of her questions was that urban farmers work long hours and they get very little financial support, and they do that to feed the most at-risk communities, and I'm in one of them in Hazelwood. And it's hard for them to access financial resources. So the thought was that this could give those kind of communities and what we've been labeling food deserts a chance to have access to things like produce and healthy food. There is no grocery store in the Hill District here in Hazelwood or many other neighborhoods. And to help them cut through some of the red tape to bring food to where it's needed. We're at a time of 40% inflation, and it was thought that, and this came up from many other people in our meetings, that they felt like access to those funds could help them have food directly to people most in need. So thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Joy. Any other questions for Sam or Jody about the Food Justice Fund? Okay, as I mentioned, our next meeting on the Food Justice Fund that is open to the public is Monday at 11 a.m. And Sam or Jody, if you could link some information in the chat about how to get involved or a Zoom link, that would be very helpful. But we do encourage folks who have questions, who have ideas to come join those and who want to support the work. All right. So that concludes the majority of our agenda. We're now going to get into some member information sharing. So we've covered a few topics and deep dives, but if you have events coming up or updates on grants or whatever, some news you want to share, now is your opportunity. But first, Carlin, do you have something?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I just wanted to remind you all that our last member meeting of the year will be Tuesday, December 13th. I am dropping the registration link in the chat right now. So if you like, you can go ahead and register for that right now. That'll be, generally speaking, for the last meeting of the year, we like to do a reflection on the progress that's been made over the year, celebrate all the Food Policy Council partners and their work. So we would love to have you all there. So I just wanted to drop that. That's all.
Great, thank you. So if you have something you want to share, raise your hand so that it can be organized, or type it up in the chat. I did notice that Faye Young had mentioned the Black and White Reunion is planning the 25th annual Pittsburgh Racial Justice Summit, which will be held in person on January 20th and 21st. So you can scroll up in the chat for more information about that. Evelyn.
Hi, I wanted to mention that our next event with Dante will be on the 4th at Hazelwood Library, and we need volunteers for that. I need 2 people really badly to help us hand out food and unpack from our truck. So if anybody's
in Hazelwood, I'd be happy to help you. You never reached out to me, and I've told you in the past I'd like to volunteer. So
absolutely, yeah, I'll put my email in the chat. And if something you're interested, please shoot me an email so I can send you over the registration to volunteer. But anybody is obviously welcome to come down, but if we could get 2 designated volunteers, that would be amazing.
I live 2 blocks from the neighbor, well, from there, and I was a Food Justice, but so yeah.
Joy, I think I must have miswrote down your email because I did send you the flyer last time, and I do apologize.
I was gonna say I've reached out to you many times before. I never heard back from you, so thanks.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other announcements or updates from folks?
This might be a world record quick Food Policy Council member meeting, guys.
I think it's because the guy chairing it didn't talk so much as the other.
Denny's our old chair, for those of you who don't know.
I'm missing a few of his jokes and baseball references. I apologize for letting you all down.
Would one of you pass along my email to her, because I'd like to help volunteer?
Yeah, I just saw you drop that, Joy. I will email that to Evelyn right now.
Okay, I live right next to that library, and my kids are in school at that time, so if that helps you.
Thank you.
I'll say tonight at 8 p.m. is the Fetterman Oz debate, if anybody is interested in watching. And of course, we have an election coming up. I feel obligated to mention that. Any other events we're sharing with the group?
I think Joy mentioned that she was making pork chops for us for dinner tonight. Is that right, Joy?
I said that was my personal dinner for my family, but
Oh,
if anyone's interested in any recipes, or I do congregate feeding, cooking at First Presbyterian, and we'll be having our weekly rotate downtown at the end of the month. If you know people are in need, I could drop a link for it.
that'd be great.
Yeah.
Jody?
Hey, Jody.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention PASA had recently sent an email out regarding the new Farm Bill and the Climate Day of Action. So if you're not on PASA's mailing list, get on it so you can look at that, since 2023 is the Farm Bill year. Yay.
What was a quick highlight from the PASA email about the Farm Bill?
I'm sorry.
What was a quick highlight of the PASA email about the Farm Bill?
I mean, I think the big message is that they want to make sure that it's climate smart. I think that's the phrase that they were using. So they want to make sure that people are putting the focus on climate change in the Farm Bill, making sure there's more funding allocated toward that and programs that help address those issues. So please provide feedback.
Thanks for bringing that up, Jody. I just dropped a link to a blog that they posted, and you can submit comments on that link. And then there's 4 key sustainable agriculture policy needs in that blog. So I think that that's what you're referring to, Jody. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, last call. If you have anything else to share with the group, now's your chance.
I think that's a wrap.
I think that's a wrap. Well, thank you so much, everybody,
Thank
for
you.
joining.
Night,
Thanks,
everybody.
all.
Thank
Have a
you.
wonderful evening.
Thank you, Nick. Good job.
Have a good evening.